Hello, my friends. This is Coach Aaron Saft in the Running is Life podcast, and I'm going to expound upon last week's podcast where we talked about intervals. And are you doing your intervals at a long enough duration for them to actually have the effect that you want? Now, when we talk about training, we also have to discuss whether intervals are actually worth adding to your routine. So, we talked about two different types of intervals last week. There are all sorts of workouts that one can do and systems that people can work. And I'm not going to really dive deep on the various types. But what I do want to kind of talk about is there a right way for you to train? It's a great question. Is there a specific way that someone should train for a marathon, or one should train for ultra or a 5K? Now, there's certain things that are ideal, but are they necessary? And I might argue that it really depends on your goal. What is your goal for said event, right? So, if you're looking for a specific time, then, doing workouts would probably behoove you to try to attain your goal. And what spurred this is I've been reading The Norwegian Way, which, talks about, obviously the Norwegians and how they've been training for some time now. With their history of skiing and skating, they've become a pretty fierce force in the triathlon world, as well as obviously Jakob Ingebrigtsen in the distance events. And then we have their hurdler, Warholm, in the 400 hurdles, who's just incredible. So, the Norwegians are obviously doing something correctly in their training. And this book kind of takes a deep dive and looks into what are they doing. And so, I thought, there's not one right system. That everybody works differently, and I listened to a podcast recently with the author of this book, and he said that this isn't for everyone because really at the root of it, this is a very high volume system. In other words, there's a lot of time on feet, a lot of mileage, if you will. So, Is it again, it's not going to be for everybody because not everybody can do high mileage. And that's, where we start to talk about, well, what workouts, can you do that would help you in place of that high volume? Now, if we were to pick this apart, and as I said, there's no one right way to train, but if your goal was to finish a marathon, you could just build up your volume, right? Like if you had plenty of time, the generous cutoff for the marathon gave you plenty of time, you could obviously just build up your distance and get comfortable with your volume. You don't have to interject any type of speed workouts or anything like that if that's your goal. You have less likelihood, I would say, if done properly, building to your volume to a sustainable level in which your fitness would allow you to just simply finish this marathon. I mean, there's obviously cases of people that in the past have barely trained and completed a marathon. So, do I suggest that? No, obviously not. You want to try to, complete this with as least pain and suffering as possible. So, looking at potentially building in that regard is totally fine. Now, I'll interject here and say that I'm not a big fan of the 10% rule, and I think a lot of coaches would agree. It would take you forever if you think about building at 10% when you start at very little to actually grow into a substantial volume that would allow you to comfortably finish a marathon. So again, I'm not a big fan of the 10% rule. Now, is there a rule that I do follow? Well, I mean, mine has come from experience and growing volume gradually each week, adding a little bit to the long runs. staying consistent for a little bit and then growing again when we see that the person is becoming more and more comfortable with the volume. So, whereas volume may stay consistent for a week or two, in doing so, you can build the volume a little bit higher than a 10% increase. So, potentially doing it that way would be a better served function for you in your training. So think about that. If you're thinking about your volume. Now, as I said last week, if we're doing high intensity intervals, max VO2 or peak VO2, however we want to define it, then we don't want to be building volume, right? That's always a consideration, is that during that phase, if you are doing intervals, you don't. But if you're just trying to build volume, or you're doing threshold, which is, the Norwegian way, is really lactate and testing lactate to make sure that you are recovered enough to be able to, to do another threshold workout. And it's if you kind of look at it, it's very similar to the 80-20. Matt Fitzgerald has become very famous for talking about the 80-20 rule. Now, that has been a part of the Norwegian system for a long time, and I believe it can be contributed to Philip Skiba. I have his book in front of me here, Scientific Training for Endurance Athletes. I've got two books that are kind of next up. I'm kind of reading a ton of books at the moment, but one is Training Lactate Pulse Rate. That's by Peter Janssen. And then Scientific Training for Endurance Athletes by Philip Skiba. I'll put both of those books in the show notes. The Janssen book may be a little bit more difficult to find, and it could be a little bit dated. It's definitely an older book. I'm trying to find the copyright date for you. Let's see. I think this book came out in the late 80s, if I remember. Yeah, 87. So, but there still can be some good stuff to pull from this, because he trained some amazing athletes and obviously did some amazing things. So, but again, going back to what I was saying, is that the Norwegian way is, yes, building volume, increasing volume, and getting a lot of time on feet, like insane in time on feet, 100 plus miles for runners. And doing threshold work. They very rarely do anaerobic work, peak VO2 or max VO2 workouts. They save those for race day because of the volume being as high as it is. It is a very interesting system. And again, not for everybody. So, that's why some people interject the anaerobic work, the max or peak VO2 work, so that they can, increase fitness in a way that they perhaps can't get in enough time on feet, right? Enough volume within their week. That it kind of is a way that ultra runners kind of try to cut corners too, because working a 9-to-5 job, it becomes very difficult with a family to include high volume during the week, and it's very difficult to include all your volume on the weekend, week after week. That just creates a lot of fatigue in a short amount of time, and then you spend a lot of your week just recovering from it, whereas you could kind of disperse the volume a little bit more during the week and do some workouts and get more fitness in that regard. So, again, there are workarounds, and it's just depending on you and your time schedule, your availability, and what you can do for training. And in ultra, volume is key, right? We want to make sure that we're getting in a good amount of volume each week, and that's tough. It's tough for most people. I recognize that. Most ultra runners, especially when we're looking at peak phase, we're looking at 9+ hours of the week just spent running, and that can be hard to devote. That's like minimal. You want more than that, which is tough to commit to for a lot of people. And it's, especially on the weekends, when you want to be doing it, you may have family obligations. It's really difficult. I've been finding myself doing a lot of my long runs on the weekdays because my weekends have been consumed by track meets, going to my kids' track meets, which is great. Rightly so. They deserve my time. So, but other people don't have that luxury, and that's what becomes difficult is, well, like, how can I do this all? I can't train at high volume, so adding some of those workouts in, or if you have a job where you're walking around a lot, you can start to count some of that time as time on feet. I have an athlete that tracks how many miles they've walked in a day because their job requires a lot of walking and time on feet. That counts towards your training. That's absolutely counts towards your training. So you can look at that side of it too if you're training for ultra. Specifically those longer distance, 100K, 100 mile, because it is good time on feet. Now, again, you have to look at your goal, and you may have to change your goal, right? Like, don't be ashamed if, you're using a walk-run interval, and perhaps your walk interval is longer than your run interval. That's okay. It just depends on how you train and what's your most effective locomotion. Right? Like if you're a great walker, I can think of one runner that, when we look at heart rate, they're actually more efficient at walking than they are at running. They can walk at a faster rate and maintain a lower heart rate. So, I said to the athlete, why don't you just, walk it? And they're like, well, the purpose is I want to run this. Well, I understand that, but, if you're going to get a faster time by walking it, I don't understand why you wouldn't do that. Like I know people want to run it, but and that has changed. We've been together for quite some time now, and now this runner's running has become faster than the walk pace. It's just taken time. This is an older athlete, so. But, again, this athlete was completely new to the sport and came to it at a very late age, which is awesome. I give kudos to this runner. And, I just want to say that, you have to be patient with the sport sometimes. And that's hard. People come into it and expect grandiose things right off the bat. And, without the experience, it's tough to build that volume. Because you haven't had the background in endurance sports, perhaps. So being patient with it and growing with the sport. Like a lot of people will come into the sport and all of a sudden their first year they say, I want to do 100 miles. That's a great goal, but do you have the capacity to do so? What in your training history, makes you feel like you can do 100 miles, especially some of these rugged 100 milers that we have. It's a great challenge, but as I've often said, I was running for 2016 was my first 100 miler. I had been running for 26 years before I ran my first 100 miler. So obviously my story is a little bit different because I started running at a younger age and would not have been doing 100 milers at that point. But even still, I graduated college in the year 2000, and it took me 16 years after college to run a 100 miler. Could I have done it sooner? Sure. But, I took my time and enjoyed the speed that I had in doing marathoning and 5Ks and such. So. But everybody has their different goals, and far be it for me to say that, like, when you come into a sport and you just want to go straight to ultra, that's your prerogative. It's just making sure that you do it wisely, that you have the capability to train for it, and put yourself in the best case scenario to finish it, right? Because some people come into the sport and they say, like, well, I want to run sub 24 hour. And again, maybe not for the first one. Maybe for the first one, you just say, I want to finish, right? I want to make sure that I feel good, have a good experience, get this under my belt, understand the distance a little bit more, practice with nutrition, gear, pacers, crew, etc. And then, if you had a good first crack, then you can say, okay, that was a great first crack. And maybe it happens. Maybe you do go sub 24, and that's awesome. But again, look at your goal, make sure it's realistic, and then, that has to account for what does your training entail. And should you be able to train, and have the time to train for what you're doing. There's many different ways to come at the training and to, try to achieve your goal. But I would say, it takes some time to figure out what is going to work best. Especially if you're prone to injury, that's really difficult, right? Like, how do you build volume and not get injured? Do we have to take into account, should you be cross training some? Parker Valby, one of the greatest NCAA runners of ever, we'll just say. I mean, she's done some incredible things. She was very injury prone and spent a lot of time on the arc trainer, something like an elliptical, if you will. She did a vast majority, probably 75 to 80% of her training was on an arc trainer. It's not to say it can't get done. My son has had sore Achilles, so we've had him on our elliptical doing workouts. He's been doing threshold workouts on the elliptical. Came out and run with me today. We had a fantastic run. He's fine running wise. I have no idea where he's at fitness, because we haven't really tested it on the track. I don't want to, cause him to get injured. So, we're being really cautious with that as well. So, there are factors that kind of sideline us, but there are things we can do in the intermediary to make sure that we're getting in some training and doing the best we can to be trained, for our goal. They say that the elliptical / arc trainer is like the closest thing that we can replicate running with. Obviously, it goes back to the law of specificity. If you want to train for a running race, you need to be running. And if you can't run, then what's the most similar to it? And that would be the most similar. So, things to consider in your training, right? And things to consider whether you should be doing workouts or not. Again, we have to consider the susceptibility to injury. Is it worth doing some high intensity intervals if, our likelihood of getting injured is very high? I would say no, it is not. And that's something I discussed with my coach, Ryan. I said, I am very susceptible to injury, and when I do peak VO2 work, the intensity is such that it just puts me in a fatigue state, and even with a decrease in volume, I tend to get injured at this point in my career. It's be it my mobility patterns, weaknesses, which I'm trying to work on all of it, but at the same time, it's not really worth it for me to do that kind of peak VO2 work for what I'm training for. So we kind of stick to threshold and keeping that heart rate at a level where I'm not creating as much acidity within my blood and much fatigue that I can still do good volume and get in good training and recover. That's the biggest thing is making sure that we recover from these efforts. So, again, things to consider there. When we talk about volume, the biggest thing is that you do it in a way that's sustainable, right? Like you can grow, you can get better from it. You don't create enough fatigue. We talked about this in the past. A lot of coaches use 3 weeks up, 1 week down. Is that the worst thing in the world? No, but there's really no scientific reason to do so. You want to make sure that you're growing, and then if you start to notice fatigue, then that's a good time for you to back off. So, I'm not a big advocate, again, of the 10% growth rule or of the 3 weeks up, 1 week down. That, there's nothing scientific about that other than it comes from, and I've talked about this in the past, that's how they administered anabolic steroids. They would shoot for 3 weeks and then take 1 week down to absorb it. Is it the same thing as training? Well, we can absorb training, but we can also go further, get more fitness, and then if we take an off week, we're absorbing more fitness. So we're actually cutting ourselves short by, giving ourselves rest weeks so frequently. So something to consider in your training is, does the 3 weeks up, 1 week down, is that really necessary, or can you be gaining more? Our body typically responds well to a stimulus for 5 to 6 weeks. So if the fatigue level is not such that necessitates a recovery week, then continue to expand for 5 or 6 weeks. if the body's responding, and then give it, a down week. So maybe you go 5 weeks working on a system. I like to work at specific systems and continue the growth of the systems. Some coaches use muscle confusion. They use different workouts at different times, even within the same week, and that's fine. Like I said, there's nothing that says that that's the wrong way of doing it. I just think that working on systems specifically allows the body to make better adaptations, because you're continuing to work on the same system for a specific amount of time before you rest and allow the adaptation to take the most effect. So again, not wrong to mix systems, not wrong to do different types of workouts within a training block. But, again, I think working on a specific system to grow it and expand it, focus on it, and then resting and then working a different system allows for more adaptations and better adaptations in the course of time. So is there anything scientific about either? No. I mean, you're going to gain fitness in both regards. Again, are you going to gain more fitness from one? Like, I would argue you're going to gain more fitness from working on a specific system for a specific amount of time versus, confusing the systems and working on two different systems. You're growing those systems, but not at the rate that you would if you're working on the specific system all at the same time. So that might be a confusing statement. I'm sorry if it was, but my argument would be for just doing and working on one specific system at a time, and that would be like working on your lactate threshold system. Now, is it to say you can't work on that system twice in one block? No. Some people want to work on speed. Some people want to work on their peak VO2. Like, say you're a 5K runner and you want to work on that. So, you may work on that speed system for maybe 4 weeks and then take a little downtime, throw in a little interjection of perhaps threshold for a little bit, maybe 3 weeks at threshold, and then a recovery week, an adaptation week, and then go back into peak VO2. So you've given the peak VO2 system a chance to absorb that fitness. You've worked on another system, so you're not taxing that peak VO2 system, that max VO2 system. And then, you've now you can go back and work on that peak VO2 and try to bolster it even further. So, there are ways to continue to work on the same system, even within the same training block for a specific goal race. So, don't think that it has to be just one block or one cycle of a specific energy system. We can do that multiple times, but we do need that little break in between. So as I said earlier, the body typically works for about 5 to 6 weeks within a specific system, and then it needs a new stimulus. The threshold, that it's arguable that one you can continue to improve upon. Again, it's an aerobic system, so we can continue to improve aerobically, and that's why the Norwegian system uses the threshold, is because potentially you can continue to improve upon that over the course of time and use the volume that you're building to increase and improve your max VO2. So that's a very interesting system, and they've become very popular at using the double threshold workouts. In other words, doing 2 threshold workouts in one day. The way that typically happens is that you would take a longer workout that you typically wouldn't do in one session. For instance, if I prescribed, let's just say maybe 6 by 8 minutes. That's a pretty tough workout. That's 42 minutes of intervals, right? 48 minutes of intervals, 6 times 8. So with that said, that's a long one. But if what happens now, if I say, okay, well, in the morning, I want you to do 4 by 8, and then in the evening, you're going to do 4 by 8 again. I've now increased 2 more intervals. So my total time here is 64 minutes of threshold work over the course of a day. So I've really increased the amount of time spent in threshold, and that's the point of double threshold workouts. Now, the key here is recovery, right? Are you recovered enough to do that second workout? Meaning that you have to be very, very observant. You have to understand, where you're at in the recovery process, and that's why the Norwegian system uses a lot of blood lactate testing, and that's very difficult. It gets expensive. The machine itself is not that expensive. It's the testing equipment, the needles, and the paper and such that you have to test with. So it becomes quite expensive. But if you're abiding by heart rate and looking at heart rate, it's obviously it's a good way to monitor staying within the correct system and noting your resting heart rate. How are you recovering from these workouts? Do I suggest a lot of people doing double threshold workouts? Not necessarily. I can only think of a handful of athletes that I coach that I would, entertain doing this with. We may potentially work with one of those athletes this winter in trying it. It's not a new concept, but it's a difficult concept to get right. It's tricky. It is very tricky and requires a lot of observation and communication on both the coaches and the athlete's part. Or if the athlete's doing it on their own, it becomes even more vital that they are cognizant of what's going on and understand, the complete spectrum of this workout and what they're looking for. What are the measures that they're trying to observe and metrics that they should know. So, some interesting things. Certainly it's, again, the sport, has kind of, been evolving scientifically. We're learning more and more. The book is fantastic, The Norwegian Way. Again, I'll put all 3 books in the show notes. I think the Norwegian Way is a great read. I really have enjoyed reading it thus far. I have not completed the book yet, but, it went through, training at altitude and the benefits of training at altitude. And if you're going to race at a higher elevation, what to do, or if you are training at altitude, when should you come down prior to the race? It's really cool stuff. Not a lot of us can have that luxury to be able to train at altitude and then reap the benefits of racing at sea level thereafter. But again, there's just some really cool concepts in the book. So if you are an interested party, I do highly suggest the book. And as I read these other 2 books that I referenced, I'll talk more about those as well, because I think there's some really good things that we can pick up. I've kind of committed this year, my New Year's resolution, or Happy New Year's, by the way, is to use my time more wisely. I kind of find myself glued to the TV a lot, and I'm going to try to be better at using that time for reading and learning, and being a little bit more cognizant of my time and what I'm doing with it. So I started pulling these books off my shelves. As I said, I've got about 3 books on my nightstand that I'm reading simultaneously. One is John Wooden's book. Another one is on Western states and the history of Western states, and then the Norwegian Way. So quite a few things on the table right now, and it kind of keeps me into each book by taking a break. And I'm also reading Sabrina Little's new book. My apologies, I'm blanking off the top of my head, but I'm actually listening to that one on Audible. I'll put that one in the show notes as well. My apologies for blanking on the title. But anyhow, as I said, been really kind of immersing myself in the books and trying to pull a little bit more out and understand a little bit more, because as I said, there's no one right way to train. I use a lot of specific blocks and do it specifically in different ways for my marathoners and my ultra runners. But it's not always the right way. And that's what we have to find out is, okay, this isn't working. And that's usually the communication coming from the athlete is like, I'm not I'm not enjoying this. That's a huge piece of it. If they're not enjoying it, it's really difficult to set these workouts up, because enjoyment has to be a huge part of this. We're not doing it for a living, right? Sure, we want to achieve a goal, and I mean, we can have the conversation that, this will help you achieve that goal. But if simply they are just not enjoying it and don't want to be a part of that process, then we have to take that into consideration for sure. And then, looking at, the metrics, right? Like if it's causing too much fatigue and not recovering from specific workouts, then again, is it worth doing? No, it's not. We want to make sure that they are recovering and feeling, okay after workouts as well. So, definitely, I have to keep track of the runners and what's going on. So you have to do the same. So make sure you are monitoring yourself in some way. All right. So anyhow, moving on here. Okay. So a few weeks ago, I talked about, some of the items that I was really looking forward to in 2025. And I actually thought about doing a YouTube video to review 2 of the shoes that I've tried. I was hoping that, they would kind of be fruitful for me and perhaps be good shoes for Western states. The first, which I mentioned in that podcast, was the Terex Agravic Ultra Speed Ultra, the Adidas. It's kind of their super shoe. David Roche has been on about it and on and on. And he's, he ran it extremely well at Leadville and at Javelina. Tom Evans won with this shoe at Western States. So, I kind of looked up best shoes for Western States, and the top company was actually Hoka, followed closely by Adidas in this article that I was reading. I think it was by I Run Far. It was the most used shoe, we should say, not the best shoe, but the most used shoe. And I had ordered the Terex from my friends at 7000 Elevation Running Company. It felt comfortable. It really did. It felt good underfoot. The first thing I noticed was there was a heavy rocker. The heel is beveled such that it really goes back. There's not much heel under you, actually. And the problem with what that I found was that there's not much of a midfoot to the shoe. In order to shave some weight, they made the midfoot very narrow, and that's my landing platform on the trails. Landing midfoot, it gives me the most surface area of the shoe typically, but in this shoe there's not much there, which made it feel very understable to me. I did not like how the shoe kind of smushed out. The foam feels really good underfoot, but when it smushes out, it feels very understable. And the upper is almost non-existent. It's very loose. There's not much structure to it, so the foot shifts on the platform. Now, anybody that's listened to this podcast knows that I have a bad left ankle. It is very weak. I work on it. My weight coach, we actually spoke today, and I'll get into that story in a second. But the Adidas, I just felt like every step I was concerned that I was going to roll my ankle. And that was just on a gravel road. I didn't even take these to the trail. I just felt so uncomfortable in these shoes because I felt like every step I was going to go over. Now, myself, I land very laterally, and my foot stays very lateral. I don't really get to neutral. I stay when I toe off my pinky toe. So having a shoe with a high stack height and a very soft foam, it exacerbates that. It makes me roll really far out, which it feels like my foot is just going to roll over, like my ankle's going to roll. So I could not stay comfortable in this. Like, it's not something that I can kind of train my brain. It's not worth it for that, because I want to feel comfortable. I don't even want to think that I have a shoe on my foot. That's what I'm looking for. So the Terex are out the window. I'm going to sell those. If you're interested in a size 11.5, please get in touch with me, because I'm going to sell these. I am also going to sell the Hoka Tecton 3s. I just received these shoes. I ran yesterday and today in them. And today, when I was running on the single track, I rolled my ankle in rapid succession twice. And if your foot starts to go over, there is no self-correct in this shoe. You do not have the ability to correct that little bit once it starts to go over, because of how structured this is with its plate. Your foot goes over. And as I said, with my ankle the way it is, it's like I don't have the tendons left in my foot to be able to, have the strength to pull it back over either. So, it may work for some people, and so may the Terex. Obviously, it worked for Tom Evans and for David Roche, but for Aaron Saft, these shoes are not the work for me. So I reached out to my strength coach and said, hey, rolled my ankle twice today, need to get back onto some, strength / mobility for my ankle. So, so frustrating, yes. I've got a compression sleeve on it right now. It doesn't hurt, which is good. It's tight. I know it's tight. Like I definitely overstretched whatever tendons and ligaments are left in my ankle. But and I'm not frustrated because I ran home. I got out of the single track and got onto the road, ran home. I was fine, like running home, I knew it was there, but it's hurt worse in the past. So, but as I said, I'm going to sell both the Terex and the Hokas. They have no room in my lineup. I do not need those shoes. I am not going with a plated trail shoe. I have the Altra. Timps are coming tomorrow. They have the new Timp. I believe it's the 5 is out now. The Timp 4 worked really well for me. I really found a lot of comfort in that shoe, and I liked what the updates are thus far. The updates being that they added the Vibram Mega Grip to the outsole, and then they've used their new Ego foam to make it lighter. So a lighter, grippier shoe. It sounds like great improvements to me. I'll be interested to get it underfoot and get some miles on it. I'm totally bummed because the Adidas and the Hoka were both very expensive shoes. I really had high hopes for those, but I can't imagine wearing those in the high country, especially if we have snow and such like we did last time. Now, maybe we won't, but again, I just did not feel comfortable with my foot placement. I felt like I was constantly watching the ground and worried about what my foot was doing. So, I like it when I can just go for a run and not be as conscious about where my foot is. So unfortunately, those didn't work out. So I did get the light belt, the fit belt with the light. I have not been able to use that on a run yet. I'm still excited to test that out, and as I get to the other items on that list, I'll be talking more and more about those. I did get the Petzl, the update to the Swift RL 1,000. 1,100 lumens. Excited to test that one out as well, but like I said, I have not got to that yet. So still some things to test out. I'm loving the Amphipod. They have the Ergo Minimalist, I believe it's called. I use the 20-ounce handheld. It's got 2 gel bandoliers. I've been using that pretty regularly. The gels have all been working. Been very happy with the combination of the Cis Beta Fuel gel in combination with the others that I mentioned in that podcast. It gives me about 70 grams per hour, which is much more than I'm used to taking. I also started drinking the Huma electrolyte drink. It does not have any calories. What I noted was that it kind of has that fake sugar taste, if you will, since you're not getting carbohydrates from a sugar source. I imagine they used some kind of sweetener that was artificial. It doesn't taste bad. It just doesn't taste, I would say, usual, like your usual sweet. It just tastes a little bit different. It was fine. I used it for the first time today, so stay tuned. I'll be using that more frequently to see how I like it or not. But I'm trying something that's non-effervescent. The Noon is great. I just don't like the effervescence, the kind of bubbly nature to it. So the Huma is just a powder that you add to the water, which is is great. So I know people use Element, but I'm going to be honest, it's a little too much sodium for me. I could probably use a half packet if I so desire, but it's just a little too much. It's too much sodium for me. So use what's working for you, but like I said, I've been turned on to some great nutritional and hydration things, so I'll continue to try those and review those as I go through them. All right, my friends, I wish you a very happy new year. I hope all is going well with you. Thank you to all that have reached out to me for 2025 coaching. My goodness, it's so nice to hear from so many of you. I certainly appreciate that. I appreciate all of the compliments that you guys have paid, the notes that you guys have sent. It really does mean a lot to me. I really do appreciate all of you for listening, for sharing the podcast. If you do so, I can't be more grateful to you all. And thanks again to all my Patreon supporters. It's amazing to have that support as well, so that I can continue to do this. It gives me incentive, obviously, to keep doing it. It is really a joy, and I'm glad to still be here in 2025, doing this 5 years later. I started this podcast, I think it was February of 2020. So we're approaching 5 years of this podcast, which is incredible. So thank you for being a part of it, my friends. If you have questions, comments, concerns, just reach out to me. All of my links are in the show notes, all the ways you can reach out to me. Happy to hear from you. So thanks for doing so. Happy New Year, my friends. Keep moving forward. Running is life.